So let's continue on with the internal anatomy of the heart. So you see the heart here on the slide, and I want you to focus on the bold terms. So here's the heart. We are looking at the heart directly in maybe someone else's chest. The way that we name the chambers of the heart is based on the location of the heart in the person. So for me, this is my right side, which it may not look like that with the camera. This other one's the left side. So when the heart is in your body, you will refer to the chambers of the heart on your right side as the right atrium and the right ventricle. On your left side, the left atrium, the left ventricle. So if you see a heart in front of you, you have to ask yourself, is this the front of the heart or the back of the heart? I'm not going to show you the back of the heart and do that kind of thing because we're not in a lab. You can't put your hands on a three-dimensional object and figure it out. So what you're going to do is look at the heart. You're always going to see that the heart has a slight left angle, and this is called the apex down here. So this is angled to the left side. So it means that the left side actually appears shorter when you're looking at it, and then the right side has this nice curved long side. Regardless, top chamber, atrium, plural atria. So right and left atria. Lower chambers, so here's the lower chamber, here's a lower chamber, and that's what we call the ventricle or the ventricles. So right ventricle and left ventricle. Now you see this thing here between the atrium and the ventricle, and essentially what it is in a valve. It's a valve, and it's associated with what we call chordae tendineae. And these chordae tendineae are tendons that are holding this valve in place. These are atrioventricular valves because they're between an atrium and a ventricle. So this one on the right-hand side is called the tricuspid valve. This one on the left-hand side is called mitral valve. I don't mind if you just know atrioventricular valve because it makes a lot of sense. So there's another valve, and this valve is important because it is making sure that the blood from the lower chamber, so in this case, here's the right ventricle with this valve in the way, and blood is going from the right ventricle out this trunk, or this very large vein called the pulmonary trunk. And this is essentially going to go to the lungs. So we have the pulmonary arteries here going to the left lungs, and this one going to the right lungs. So there's a valve here, and it's called a semilunar valve. So it's a different shape, more cupped shape. So it's called semilunar, and it is going to prevent the backflow of blood from the pulmonary trunk into this right ventricle. Now notice on the left side of the heart, so the left ventricle is also going to be connected to a major vessel. This is the aorta, or the aortic arch. I'm sorry, I got something in my eye. And essentially right here in the background, you can see the aortic valve. Okay, so the aortic valve is going to prevent the backflow of blood from the aorta into the left ventricle. Now let's just take a look here for a minute. Do you remember how we said that all arteries carry blood away from the heart? So that's why this particular artery, the pulmonary artery, appears blue. They show it in blue because this is showing you that this is the vein. So it's called the pulmonary artery because it's carrying blood away from the heart to the lungs. These, even though they're red, they are going to be veins because they are carrying blood from the lungs back to the heart. So we have to think about the direction that the blood is moving before we call it an artery or vein. The blue and red, more or less, gives us an idea if it's an artery or vein, but also they tell us that oxygenated blood is going to have a brighter red appearance. The blood in veins is certainly red, it's just not nearly as bright as the blood in the artery. So let's move along. So remember how I said the heart is a double pump? So while we have blood filling chambers, we also have blood pumping out to the lungs. So essentially, we can describe this double pump as moving blood along two circuits. One of those circuits is literally from the heart to the lungs and back. The term pulmonary is alluding to the lungs. So for example, if you have chronic bronchitis or asthma or emphysema, you would go to a pulmonologist. So think about pulmonary meaning lungs. So this is the blood being transported from the heart to the lungs and then of course back to the heart. What is it doing along that circuit? It is taking that carbon dioxide rich blood and essentially dividing up into these major vessels, veins, pulmonary veins and venules going to the lungs. And at the capillaries in the lungs, we are going to drop off that CO2 and pick up the oxygen. Where does it go? You drop off the CO2, you exhale it out, you breathe in, you bring in plenty of oxygen to move across the membrane. Now, this is happening all the time. It's not like you're releasing all of the CO2 that are in the capillaries at the same time. It's just an ongoing mechanism to make sure that we're removing as much CO2 as possible and putting oxygen back in the blood as quickly as possible. So when that blood now is oxygenated or full of oxygen, we're going to take it back to the heart. So this is still the pulmonary circuit. When we get to the heart, then we're going to need to put it through the pump, the left side of the heart, this other part of the heart, and we are going to transport that blood out of the heart to the body. So the systemic circuit goes to the rest of the body, and then essentially it's going to dump off the oxygen, pick up the CO2, dump off the nutrients and hormones, and pick up the waste, and it brings it back to the heart. Okay, so that's the systemic circuit. Now, the two sides of our pump are separated by a very well-defined wall we call the septum. And also the heart is enclosed in a particular sac called the pericardial sac, and there's pericardial fluid that's between the sac and the heart that is going to protect the heart. So some things to take a look at. All right, internal anatomy of the heart. We went through a lot of this already, but here we see the right atrium. Over here, kind of hard to see, but that would be the left atrium. Down here below that tricuspid valve, we are going to have the left ventricle. In this space in here below the mitral valve, we are going to have the left ventricle. So this is the right ventricle. Now we know that there are vessels attached to the chambers. So here's the superior vena cava, bringing oxygen poor blood back in this major vein into the right atrium. And we are bringing blood back here from the lower extremities from the inferior vena cava and putting it here. So superior from the head and the chest and arms, inferior from the abdomen and the lower extremities. That blood then passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then it passes from the right ventricle out this semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, and it splits to go to the left pulmonary arteries and the right pulmonary arteries. So it's going to do that whole thing it does in the lungs. It's going to come back. Here we have our left pulmonary veins, our right pulmonary veins, and it's going to dump the blood in the left atrium, which is here. Then it passes through the mitral valve into the lower chamber here, which is the left ventricle. Then it passes from the left ventricle out to the semilunar valve into the aorta, which is going to branch here to essentially go to the chest, the arms, and the brain. Okay, and this is just the outside of the heart. Notice that the heart has its own blood supply called the coronary artery. All right, I am going to let you appreciate this figure. We've gone through the internal anatomy. Don't want you to name the chambers of the heart based on an external anatomy, but here you can get an idea. Again, here you have your major vessels. We have both the carotid artery and vein, several of them essentially supplying the heart. Here we see it branching and going around the back. So we're going to make sure that this heart is well supplied with blood. Okay. Another one to take a look at and study, particularly if you think you missed something before. All right, so I mentioned on the figure that there are coronary vessels, so there are coronary arteries and veins, And essentially, we have to ensure that we're supplying enough oxygen to the myocardium, so to this cardiac muscle. So you're going to essentially see that same thing is happening. We're dumping off oxygen, picking up CO2, dumping off nutrients, and picking up waste. Certainly, we can have blockages in these arteries. We can have clots that might end up in the arteries. So there's a lot of serious things that can happen with our coronary arteries. But one of those things is coronary artery disease. So essentially, if we have blockage in the artery that's supplying the blood with oxygen, and we now deplete it of oxygen, then a person can experience a myocardial infarction. So remember, myocardial is referring to that cardiac muscle, and that is a heart attack. I'm going to go slowly through these. This is essentially words, just like I've explained to you, about the pathway of the blood. If you want to pause it, you can. All right, so let's get an idea of the cardiac cycle. So essentially, this is the moving of the blood through the heart. Simultaneously, while ventricles are filling, atria are filling, ventricles are shooting blood out, through the aorta or the pulmonary trunk, and blood is filling. So it's just a constant thing. There should be no gaps in this whole cycle. So when we're thinking about the cardiac cycle, we are thinking about essentially blood moving through our arteries as a result of the heart beating. So when you measure your pulse, you're actually measuring the pace of the heart. I'm about to run out of time, so we will start at this slide in part 3.